All right. So welcome everybody to the Cook Library. This is one of our, in our series called Face to Face. And Betsy Loughran's here to talk about her book, her memoir. She's got so many family members here. For those of you who don't know about Zoom, I want to ask you all to find the little icon and put yourself on mute right now. Really important that everyone take a look and mute themselves. If you would like, you can go up to Betsy's picture and hover over it, and it might say pin video. You can make Betsy really big, so you're not looking at everybody else, but you're seeing her slides big. It's called pin video or spotlight. That sometimes helps you. Then you can undo that at the end when you want to see everybody again. That's how I usually do it, but you'll see if you like that. Betsy's going to speak for a while. She'll share her screen with us all. And just don't forget to take a look and make sure you're on mute, because somebody is not on mute.
I'm not on mute and I can't mute. It won't mute when I go on.
Okay, I got you, Ann. I got you. I took care of it, Ann. All right, everybody. Betsy, go ahead. Get started.
Okay. So welcome, everybody. And if you've just been coming in at the last minute and hearing us chat here, one of my goals today is to inspire people not just to write memoir, but take a chance and publish it. I did this particular memoir is self-published. It's not terribly expensive to do that. And then what happens, which I did not expect at all, I sent it out into the world and I found out I had all these relatives that I'd never met before. And it's been really fun. I've had this email relationship with all these cousins that simply reappeared in my life, or in some cases, I hadn't seen them for 60 or 65 years. So it's been a real treat for me to connect for people. And I asked some family members to come early just so I could see who you are and shake hands across the screen. So that's what we've been doing. So we are going to open with me doing a reading, and it's very nice to have you muted. I'll do that for, I think it's about a half hour, maybe 35 minutes. And what I want you to do, invite you to do, if you'd like, if you have comments, if you have questions, anything like that, use the chat function in Zoom. It's, at least on mine, it's down at the bottom, and you click on it, it'll give you a panel, and you can just write questions in it. And Amy's going to be helping me with this. And she'll, afterwards we can read either the comments and the questions. And then I also hope at the end that we will have a good discussion, because I know there's a lot of people here that I've been doing memoir writing with for years, and you have a lot of experience. So I was hoping that we'd have a useful discussion at the end of this. So let's see. Let me talk 1 minute before I get started about where to get the book. As I said, I self-published it. And that's really because I did write a book earlier in my retirement about my work life, and I enjoyed writing it. And then I found I absolutely hated the whole marketing bit, and I still have too many of them in my basement. So I decided on this one that I would just do enough, basically to send to family and friends and a few extra, and to libraries. So if you live up here in Carroll County, you can get the book from the library. If you can get it from this library, the Cook Library in Tamworth, or Sandwich, or Moultonborough. And I would really appreciate your doing that, because the librarians are giving it shelf room, and I would love to have the book borrowed out of the library. If you're down in the Amherst, Northampton area, I probably will get it down to the libraries down there. I was kind of hoping that I'd come down once this COVID thing is over and do a reading down there, because it would be fun to see all of you down there. But if you really want it, you could go buy it from Collective Copies. They're the ones who published it, Collective Copies in Amherst. And if you're a member of a learning and retirement group in Amherst, Northampton, there's a number of people who have copies down there. And I know they're passing it around. And if you still really want one, write me, because I have some extras up here and I can send them down here. And I also have a PDF that I just sent to a friend. So lots of opportunities to get it. And, you know, if I run out, I just had a little conversation with my Faith down in Collective Copies, and she said, oh, well, we'll print some more if you want them. So, you know, let me know if you'd like to do that. And let's see if that's it. I think that's enough of an introduction. So let me start the reading here. I start with a prologue, and the prologue basically starts with the year 1986. At that point, my mother was ready to move out of her big house in Evanston, Illinois. By the way, most of the action in this memoir takes place in Evanston, Illinois, which is right north of Chicago in Illinois. It's the first city north of Chicago. And she was ready to move into a retirement home, and she had just been panicking about her attic, which was huge, for years. And I said, okay, Mom, I'll come. Just, you know, cool it a little bit. And when you're ready to go, I'll come and spend a week with you and we'll take care of the attic. Just, you know, wait till I get there. And we actually had a wonderful week together. It was totally amazing. This attic went the whole width of the house, and you know, it had not just our family's attic, but a whole lot of my mother's friends had moved and their attics moved into ours. So we had the most incredible collection of stuff up there that you would believe, you know, old dolls, anyway, just lots of stuff. Actually the biggest surprise for everybody, I know Jay Healy is on this call somewhere, he'll get a charge out of this. We found letters from Albert Einstein written to Jay Healy's and my grandfather. This is the other side of the family, but that's a whole nother memoir that's sitting around ready to be written sometime, just how those letters got written. Anyway, let me just read from the beginning here a little bit. Most important, though, there were boxes of letters. The rule in our family was that once you left home, you wrote home every week. Interestingly enough, it was usually the mother that kept the letters, while the child usually tossed hers. So there were my letters home beginning in 1957 when I went off to college and ending sometime in the early 90s when we both discovered the telephone. Then there were my mother's letters to her mother, beginning when she was in college in 1929 and ending with my grandmother's death in 1954. There were other treasures as well, the courting letters between my dad's parents around the turn of the century and my mom and dad's love letters from the 1930s. There were letters from my mother's brother written during World War II, right before he was killed. And there was a box labeled memorabilia, which is where my mother tossed interesting newspaper clippings and all sorts of odds and ends that needed to be preserved for posterity. So we spent this wonderful week together, and then I just moved the boxes of letters and equal number of boxes of pictures. My friend Angie McGinnis, who's here now, came once and helped me get them down from the attic. But they really sat for 25 years because I was working full time and I didn't have time with them. But I finally pulled them out after I'd retired 4 or 5 years and began to read them. And it's been amazing to read these letters. So I want to share screen with you because I want to show you not just some of the letters, but also some of the pictures. Let's see if I can do this now. We just figured out how to do this. I think that's it. Has everybody seen the screen? Amy, can you see it?
Yes, Betsy, it's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. So let me start from the beginning. This is a picture of Mom, and I tell you, the first surprise I had was the first couple of letters that I read that it's like, wait a second, this is not my mom as I remember her at all. These first letters were just almost like a different person, but actually what it was Mom when she was a teenager, not the mom that I knew when she was in her 30s. So let me read just from one of those. The first letter also introduced the theme that dominated all the early letters, her dates with an amazing number of men. She traveled all over the East Coast for meetings with various beaus. There was the evening at the Beta House with 30 men and me. There was Nikki at Harvard, Bob at Princeton, Tubby, school unidentified, Mr. Barrett, attractive 30-year-old instructor, Frank and Chuck at Dartmouth, Walter, again, school not identified, Johnny Crowther from Harvard, plus dates at Exeter, Andover, and others. And that's only the list for the fall of 1929. So she writes to Mom about all these dates. And of course, if you had been her mother, I called her Granny. Granny obviously kind of panicked at getting this letter. And this is, I don't have Granny's letters because Mom threw them away, of course. But here is Mom's letter back a couple of weeks later. You want me to spend the weekend at the college, and I have, October 12th, and we'll be here November 9th. Anyhow, hardly any of my friends are here during the weekends. I see your point, but when I slave and study, I really truly do. 5 days a week, anything that is a change is a relaxation. If I have something to look forward to, I can get my work done faster and more efficiently. You see, Mummy, I don't date during the middle of the week like many girls do. I get to bed at 10:30, eat healthy meals, have gained weight. You hear more about the weekends because they are so much more interesting. Won't you trust me and realize that I'm old enough to know my limitations for sleep and studying? So that was the first little conflict that was happening. And you can sort of imagine that the second problem that I hit, and it's right in these first few letters, is actually comes from the first, that Mom was always running out of money. And this, for those of you in the family, know that my mother was she was the family treasurer for multiple families, not just ours. And she was the treasurer of the Girl Scouts, the hospital board, the settlement house, you name it. I generally think if she'd been born in my generation, she would have ended up as a chief financial officer for a nonprofit. But this was the avenue open for her. But going back to college, listen to this one. I'm going to send you my checkbook showing you how I have spent my money this month and ask if you could possibly afford to give me a little more. I really haven't spent 1 cent unnecessarily and I'm quite desperate already. And then we go ahead. Pico Todd, I don't know if Pico's on this call or not. She did the copy editing for the book and was wonderful. She did this little calculation. The checkbook did follow, included such things as an evening dress for $49.50. That would have been $747 in today's dollars. The evening dress is so attractive. Black velvet shoes, brown felt hat. The requests kept coming, the majority of which were for clothes. So that was my mother in the 1920s. And I think she was really a flapper to talk about it. But on the other hand, she had her head together and she graduated from Wellesley, not with the grades that she wanted, but she graduated. And there was only one last letter. I think it was a couple of weeks before graduation. She was so thrilled that Granny and Grandpa were coming to her graduation. And she said, and I just need a little bit more money or they won't let me graduate. Colleges are very good at collecting the last bit due to them. That hasn't changed in all these years. Okay, let's see. I have to hit return. The next thing that I wanted to share with you is the three cousins and their mother's trip to Munich. This is the year fall of 1932, so we're in the middle of the Depression at this point, and Grampy and his brother-in-law, Tommy Lord, were having, shall we say, business problems. And they were trying to figure out, okay, how can we cut expenses? And what they decided to do is to ship all their women folks over to Munich, Germany, because after World War I, the steep reparations that the Allies charged to Germany just had decimated the economy, and it was a very cheap place to live. So the three women who went over are Henny on the far left there, Tootie, or Suzanne Foles, and her granddaughter is here tonight, and my mother is there on the right, and that they're on the ship on the way to Munich. And they landed at the boarding house of Gitalina in Munich and stayed there for about 9 months. There are wonderful letters and stories from that. By this time, by the way, my mother and father had gotten together, so that the letters that I'm reading are letters that my mom sent to Dad. And I could read for a long time, but you'll have to read the book for most of them. Anyway, the section that I wanted to read here was about Adolf Hitler, because it turned out that this boarding house was right around the corner from where Hitler lived, and Hitler was just coming to power in the fall of 1932 when they arrived. So I wanted to read one impression that Mom had of Hitler. There's a number of them. She wasn't terribly political, by the way. In fact, she wasn't political at all. She was much more interested in the beaux that would come over from the United States to visit them. But she also was obviously aware of what was happening around the corner. So let me read you this one section about Hitler. Quiet old Munich has been seething with excitement lately, as today is the election. Yesterday afternoon, I went and stood for about a half an hour in front of Hitler's house and watched the various officials come and go. There was a huge meeting later in the afternoon, and coming home from a session, we saw thousands of people carrying the little red flags with black swastikas on them. We're going to the Hofbrauhaus soon to see the Nazis' beer joint. It is one of their favorite haunts, and we are told that there's liable to be a lot of rioting and other exciting events, which disturbs the mummies considerably, but appeals very strongly to Henny, Tootie, and myself. I find it hard to believe that we'll see any serious disturbances here because it seems like such a peaceful place. You see lots of uniforms, of course. In fact, they have squads of military police riding bicycles in perfect formation all over the place. But so far, we've seen little to indicate any kind of revolution. And there's a couple of other sessions like this as well. It was last year that I was doing the revisions for this book, and it was hard not to see parallels of when you see what is maybe some dangerous stuff going on at the national level, but it doesn't seem that important to people who are really going on with their everyday lives. And that was true of Mom and her cousins, that they are aware of this. They were not at all approving of Hitler's attitude towards the Jews, but at that point it wasn't, they didn't know about concentration camps, and it was primarily making small businesses identify themselves with gold stars in the windows and things like that. But they weren't too worried about it, and they certainly didn't see what was going to come in the future at all. So let me go on. Those are the three cousins there in their Bavarian costumes. those, at least Mom's costumes came home. I wore it, I can't remember for how many Halloweens coming up. And after they came back to the States in 1933, and the love affair between my mom and dad prospered. And finally, Daddy finished college. He was a year behind Mom. He graduated from Williams and then went to Northwestern Law School. And when he graduated from law school and had gotten the position with the firm that he worked with for the rest of his life, they got married. So on the right is Mom in her wedding dress, which is the same wedding dress that I wore, by the way. And I don't know if my cousin Prue is on this call yet, but if she is, she wore it as well. It's a lovely dress. And I think we think one of Prue's grandchildren might possibly fit into it. It takes somebody who's pretty tiny to get into it. And let's see, I gotta make this go on. And this is the chapter that I will skip for you. 2 children were born. That's me on the left with my mother in 1940. And then my sister and me, Debbie was born in 1943. And so there's the 2 of us. And the chapter I'm skipping, which is called The Birth of Betsy, is nonstop about my toilet training. So I don't think you need to hear about that tonight. Mom started toilet training, would you believe, she started me at 9 months. And of course, I didn't get with the program until I was close to 3, which is what happens to most children. So some of the letters are very funny because she was a very good writer, but we won't read them tonight. Let's see. Okay, the hardest part of the war for us was Uncle Johnny's death. You can see what an absolutely handsome man he was, and the picture on his left was with his wife, Aunt Betty. That was a really difficult situation for our family. Uncle Johnny was on, well, let me read first a piece of his, because amongst other things, Uncle Johnny was a very talented writer and had a great sense of humor. And that group of letters that I read of his, I'm just going to read you part of one, but if you want to know what it was like from a junior officer's perspective in World War II, this gives you a flavor of what it is. This is a letter that he wrote to my mother, June 29th, 1943, from Norfolk. Despite our triumph down here, you will recognize that I'm feeling a wee bit sheepish. After all, I had bade my wife, child, and friends a fond farewell with a slight admixture of "we who are about to die" formula thrown in. Then with that clean-cut, hard look of determination, I headed for the nearest gangplank, muttering, "When duty whispers, thou must." The youth replies, "I can." And then I end up selling war bonds to Negroes, machinists in this sand pile. And what an execrable acreage of reclaimed and quacked grass, all littered about beneath a merciless sun. It is the #1 eyesore of my Navy experience so far. And Washington has nothing on us in the race to throw away the taxpayers' money. We have our full quota of reclining civil service workers who loll around beneath signs saying, "Every second counts." Not only that, but the PBM squadron are busy all day removing $8,000 turrets from new planes and stowing them away where they will likely stay until they rot. They built a bridge down here and are now tearing it down, all the concrete and steel railings, because planes couldn't be hauled over it without snapping their wings. Pretty smart designing, eh? And there's a number of letters like this from Uncle Johnny. He was just a great writer. His tone changed when he was talking about his children. That's Prudy, who I kind of hope is on this call. She's another of my cousins. She was actually, I'd say, my most faithful reader as I was putting this together with her dad there. But January 1945, Uncle Johnny was on the Ticonderoga, which is an aircraft carrier, and the carrier was attacked by a kamikaze pilot that went straight through the deck, and Uncle Johnny was right underneath and was killed instantly. And so that was obviously hugely difficult for our family. The aircraft carrier, by the way, the captain managed to get rid of some of the fuel and sail it back to the United States. And I think it was back in operation just in a couple of months. But in the meantime, my mother had lost her only brother, and Prue and Jimmy had lost their father. And anyway, it was really hard. And I'd say in general, I know that Granny particularly really struggled with it for the rest of her life. It was just extremely difficult to lose a child. So one of the things that you can probably tell from this is why the men in my family, actually, they were Republicans to begin with, but boy, did they come out of the war really strong Republicans, because they were just, particularly my dad, was just totally horrified by the waste he saw. And obviously Uncle Johnny was as well. So that kind of nailed the political loyalties in our family. And Daddy actually had an opportunity to go to Nuremberg. He had been, during the war, he had been, well, actually I left out a piece. During the war, he had been part of the Inspector General's office. And I think he actually enjoyed it. He had to go all over the country inspecting Americans who were not doing things properly. And he had an opportunity to go to Nuremberg, which I wish he'd taken up on, because it would make a great story. But I tell you, 3 weeks after the Japanese surrender, the whole family was back in Evanston living with his parents. He just couldn't wait to get out. But I want to read you one thing, which I skipped. I knew I would skip something. We hear a lot about the men in World War II, and we don't hear very much about the women, because it was largely, that wasn't totally, there definitely were women who served, but by and large, the story that is not told is that the women were at home. And I just wanted to give you a sense of what Mom's life was like. She was taken out of Evanston with all of her cousins and friends, and where she'd lived all of her life, and ended up in a third floor walk up in Arlington, Virginia, outside of Washington, DC, with no air conditioning. And let me just read you a little bit about what her opinion was of Washington. In addition, Mom was in an apartment infested with moths, daddy longlegs, and mice. In October, she reported fighting the Washington Depression, moths and mildew everywhere. Also, Shelley, my dad's name was Sheldon, and it's called Shelley. Shelley left a window open a crack, and the rain left the library table white. A week later, she reported, regretting last week's letter. As soon as I sent it, things don't seem as gloomy this week. I only caught 2 moths this week. The table has been sent out to be refinished, and the mildewed laundry is all clean. A week later, though, there was damp clothes all over the apartment. By using the oven and electric heater, I managed to keep up with Betsy, who chose this week to be very temperamental. The washer and the Electrolux were broken, and I had to swallow my wrath and beg the man to come take the washer to be fixed. In summary, it was a very hard fall. Mom was cooped up in her new community without all her cousins and aunts and none of her charitable endeavors. There was no air conditioning, no clothes dryer, no paper diapers. The furnace broke down, the gasoline card was frozen, and the buses too full to be of any use. I am gloomier about the cessation of pleasure driving than anything else these days, as it is well nigh impossible to get anywhere on a bus these days without spending hours. But as Shelley says, it's a very small sacrifice in comparison with what the rest of the world is enduring. And we would be very poor sports if we complained. So life in Washington was somewhat difficult with Mom. She was there with, you know, basically 2 babies or toddlers, not knowing many people. And both she and Daddy couldn't wait to get home. Okay, let's see. The return to Evanston. The return to Evanston was really wonderful for Mom. Mom was definitely back in her element. She loved to do charitable kinds of things, and charitable things in Evanston involve lots of teas and getting together with friends and cousins. The woman, Mary Burge, on the left is Bobby Gay's and Tompe's mother, who is a cousin of my mother's. And the picture to the right that you see there, Bobby Gay, Barbara, who's on this call, is the little girl sitting on the floor there, and her sister Tompe, who's also on this call, is the next one up, the little blonde. I'm in the back there, and my sister Debbie is in the back. And we all lived in a part of Evanston called the Cabbage Patch, which, for those of you who know Evanston, it's the part of Evanston that's just west of Ridge Avenue. And our grandparents, our Granny and her sister, Nenny and Auntie Elsie, had all settled in the Cabbage Patch. By the way, it got the name from being the community garden back in the late 19th century and early 20th century. And then it was, I think actually, Suzanne McCullough is here. Her great-great-grandmother, I may have the wrong greats there, was the one who was the real estate person who managed to kind of develop the area with what I would call sort of late Victorian homes, fairly modest, but big enough for the family. And all of Granny and her sisters settled there. And then after World War II, all of their children came back, and we all settled in the Cabbage Patch as well. The house that my family bought on Wesley Avenue was about a block and a half from there. And we were talking before this program began of the dances and the picnics and the ball games and all those kinds of things. It was really a wonderful neighborhood for several generations of our family to grow up in, certainly including mine. And these pictures give you a sense about it. So let's see. Those, I think, are the really positive themes in here, but I wanted to end with 2 somewhat more negative parts of this. This will be interesting talking about afterwards. I mean, by and large, Mom was very happy. They had I wouldn't say it was it was a fairly modest social life. They would roll up the rug at somebody's house and jitterbug. My parents were absolutely wonderful dancers, or they'd play cards or things like that. It wasn't like they were big, glorious parties or anything like that, but they just would get together a lot. And it was just very close. And Mom would do everything she could in her volunteer work. And she became a golfer to spend time with her cousins and friends. But that was not exactly her job as society defended it back there. The job for women in the 1950s, if you remember all the TV programs, was to be the perfect housewife and the perfect mother. And that just didn't fit Mom very well. And I want to read a couple of sections from that. Let's see, page 114 there. It was just the expected role, and Mom never figured out how she could get out of it. I mean, she had to be a housewife and she had to be a mother. She loved us very much, but she wasn't the kind of mother who wanted to be a Girl Scout leader. She'd much rather be the treasurer of the Girl Scouts. But that, so her major outlet was either golf or charity work. And this is some of her thoughts on housekeeping. These are from 1948 and 49. March 30th, 1948. Spring is back and the mud is well. Don't know why we bother with cleaning as long as the children are around. They certainly wreck everything faster than we can scrub. And a little bit later, May 3rd. My life is a whirlwind with board meetings galore and mad scrambles getting the beds made late in the afternoon and something assembled for dinner at the last split second. One can't keep a respectable house and never be in it, and the place looks dreadful. The standards for housekeeping back there were amazing. I mean, they would do every year what I might think of doing once every 10 years at best. Then a year later, the garden is full of grass and great blank spots where there ought to be columbine and delphinium. I wish I liked to garden, or that at least my efforts would have some success to spur me on. But it certainly is discouraging to labor at something you hate and to have nothing to show for it. And I really look at Mom at that point, and a lot of women at this time in the 1950s and early 60s. This is before women's lib had come on the scene at all, and women basically weren't supposed to be working if you were of middle class or upper middle class. After they had children, your job was to stay home and take care of your husband and children. And if that didn't fit for you, too bad. So that is kind of the cage that I see my mom in. So that's one negative thing. And I wanted to read one other. And that is, was one of the more difficult things that I found in these letters. There's a considerable amount of racism. It's not the kind of, blatant racism. I mean, this was the Jim Crow era. So it wasn't really the awful stuff that you would get down south, but it was there, absolutely. Evanston was actually an amazing liberal city for the time. I went to a desegregated schools the whole time there, elementary school, junior high, and high school. That was, shall we put it, highly unusual. On the other hand, there was absolute segregation of housing. And the attitudes also had a ways to go. The first thing that I want to read you about is my friend Pat Pyant. Pat was in my elementary school, and we both took music lessons from the Northwestern Music School, which involved Saturday morning classes. And she lived, we actually lived about a block and a half from Emerson Street, which was the dividing line between the west side of Evanston, which was the African-American side of town, and the white side. And so we lived very close together, went to the same school, and we used to walk together down to Northwestern Music School. So this is a letter that my mom wrote Granny about one of our recitals. Wish you could have seen Betsy at her piano recital. The children had to dress up to represent the pieces they played, and Betsy borrowed a darling hooped skirt dress from Peggy Price, who had used it for a dance program. With lace pantaloons and her hair done up with posies in it, she was a ravishing vision. She performed very well, in fact, was head and shoulders above the others, except for the little colored girl who was undoubtedly the most talented. The funny part is that after she seated herself in the middle of the front row on the platform, she got an itch and began scratching her thigh lustily, with hoops vibrating madly with each scratch. I was practically under my chair with laughter. So that's funny, but notice that my white friends, Peggy Price, had a name, and Pat Pyant, who was an equal friend, was that little colored girl. And that's the kind of subtle racism that is very difficult. You make people become unimportant and invisible, and it's there as much as I didn't want to see it. And actually, the last thing I'm going to read you is even worse. We moved from Wesley Avenue up to the northwest section of Evanston, which was much more affluent, in 1954. And I never knew anything other than that my parents wanted a nicer house. And my father was doing well as a lawyer, so they went out and got it. I never really related to that place that much because by that time I was in high school and I left home to go to college fairly soon afterwards. But what I didn't know was why they moved. And so when I read this letter, this was another very unpleasant surprise. And let me read it to you. I will tell you in confidence what is precipitating us, but none of us are talking about it because we hope a solution will be arrived at, and gossiping about it can only precipitate a panic in the neighborhood. 2 small houses have just been built on the southwest corner of Lyons and Wesley. The Jewish, that was on our block, by the way, the Jewish contractor sold them to Negroes before they were even finished and without saying boo to any of us. I'm sorriest for people like the Horners, Horns, Millars, etc., who have lived here forever and always planned to. We have long been considering a move, and although the recent developments, if not altered, would make it terribly hard to sell this house, still we have comparatively small investment in it. It is not such a body blow for us. Have said nothing to the children. And they never did say anything to the children either. And there's a number of other letters like that, that when I read them were complete surprises to me. But when I think back of it, that's the racism of the era. You know, I just have to say that's the way the middle-class folks in Evanston, Illinois treated people of color back then. I was very glad, by the way, if any of you have been reading the papers this last week, Evanston is the first city in the United States to offer reparations to African Americans. Fairly small, they're just a fund. It's actually being financed by marijuana sales or taxes on marijuana, but at any rate, they're offering down payments and help with mortgages and things like that to people in the West Side whose families basically were denied mortgages and relegated to, you know, smaller houses than they should have been back then. So with that, I am going to, if I can get out of here, stop the shared screen. Actually, I probably should go one more and, no, I can't. And that is the end of the book reading. But what I'm hoping, let me see if we've got, has anybody written anything in chat? No, they haven't. So what I was hoping is that I could get people to unmute yourself when you want to talk, which is going to that little microphone and clicking it so it clicks on, and raise your hand. And I'm happy to recognize you. And Amy's also going to help me with this because I can't see.
Right,
you.
I'm right here, Betsy, so I'll give you a hand.
Okay, so I'm just wondering from any of you if you have either reactions to this, comments to it, questions that come up.
Betsy, there is one question in the chat that says, was all of the correspondence in English?
It definitely was, other than in some of the letters from Germany, there would be, you know, my mother might quote somebody in German. She actually, she just started studying German when they got there, but she was pretty good at languages. And so she got quite proficient. But no, that our family is definitely an English language family. So they did learn German, and I'd have to ask Tootie or some of my other cousins whether any of their mothers learned German. I know after World War II, we always sent packages to Gadelina because obviously the war was really hard on civilians there. And I remember getting back these very hard German ginger cookies every Christmas that would come in a tin box that we would have. That was part of Christmas for us. And Mom would labor over a letter in German to thank her for the cookies. Let's see, what else do we have? Did my mother move to the US? Well, my mother was born in the US and she left it for Germany in the fall of 1932 and returned to the United States in June of 1932. And other than traveling when she was much older, she was in the United States for the rest of her life. Our family, if we talk to any of the people back here, goes back well into the beginning of the 19th century with mostly, the last 2 chapters, I do a lot on genealogy, and our doer, it's the same as the Scotch, by the way, D-E-W-A-R. The doers came originally from Scotland, and they managed to come by Jamaica and then spread to Canada and then all over the United States. I found Jody Ferguson as my newest cousin who lives down in Texas area. There are doers all over the place here, but we did emigrate as a family, largely from Scotland, and have been in this country for, several hundred years. Oh, let's see, what are other ones? Did your family write about how they heard the news about the death of your uncle on the Ticonderoga? Did someone come in person or did they get a telegram? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if either Prue or Jim, my 2 cousins, Uncle Johnny's children, are on this. Let me do a quick check to see if they are. They might.
I am. I'm here.
Would you know the answer to that?
Yes. Someone came in person to me, and my mother was living with her parents at the time. And they notified them in person. And it was devastating, as you can imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's the answer. It's lovely to invite your family to a reading when they can answer the questions that you can.
Yeah.
What I
Actually,
have,
there was my mother's sickness during Prue's wedding was thrombophlebitis in the leg. And that's why she wasn't able to go to the wedding.
Yeah.
She was in the hospital.
Yeah, I think I told you that, Betsy, personally.
But it was different in the book.
Okay. I may not have, we can talk about writing memoirs. I may not have all the stories correct. The Jim down there is my cousin Jim, who is Uncle Johnny's son. And so what I have about Uncle Johnny's death are the letters between Mom and Granny. And they were just very hard to read. I did send them all to Prue and Jim, and it's hard for me to even, get through any of them without crying. They're just amazing letters. And he was quite a guy. Obviously, he died when I was, 6 years old, so I didn't really know him. But that for us was World War II as a family. What else do we have here? How are the letters preserved? Are they digitized? Oh, my Lord. Well, right now they are in 2 forms of boxes. I just shoved them in my attic, and my friend Angie, who's here today, came, I think it was about in 2008, and we got all these letters down from the attic, and I bought new boxes from Staples. So they're now in Staples boxes. And as I read them, I did type summaries of the letters and quotations that I thought I might use. And then I tossed the letters in one of 2 boxes. I would label this typescript that I was doing either keep or toss. And the letters, there's a box of letters that says keep. And I tried to put the letters that I thought, were the best that we should keep. But there's 3 huge Staples boxes of letters. And obviously my kids, when I go, are not going to want to keep those boxes of letters. So I've done the sorting, and there's another whole box that says toss. And I just moved 2 years ago from Amherst up here. And that would have been the time for me to take the box that says toss to the dump. And I looked at it for a long time and I decided I couldn't toss it. So it's still up in my attic, but it's labeled tossed. So my children know that when they get to it, they can take it to the dump. Hopefully we can recycle paper by that time. But the letters themselves are not digitized. And that may be a problem. The one thing I did that to really sort of keep the letters, and this isn't even the ones involved in this memoir, but the letters from Albert Einstein, I figure have some value. And so I did go buy one of those fancy boxes and that's another little chore that I haven't taken on, but I'm gonna, I think, write Princeton, which is I think where Einstein's papers are, and see if they want them, because I could keep copies of them, and the originals, most of them aren't, I think there's 3 of them, and only one of them is really interesting about his attitude towards religion. That is a really interesting letter. But the rest of them are just in boxes. Yes, Denny. You have to unmute yourself. It says Aston. There you go. I think we can hear you.
Not yet. There you go.
There, okay.
I just wanted to compliment you for such a beautiful job of preserving. It's a lifetime task, and a lot of people haven't been able to do it because of various catastrophes that their families have run into. So I just wanted to tell you how impressive and how lovely it is to have such a wonderful example, especially now that we have the beautiful new Tamworth History Center and a whole new evolution in the town. Bravo, Betsy. Wonderful.
Well, thank you. It is true that letters are a thing of the past. And I think letters from a family in World War II, I mean, to me, it's still my family. So it's like, well, who's interested in that? But there aren't all, there aren't letters from the generation after me other than 1 or 2. So they are very precious. And I have an equal number of Staples boxes, by the way, of photographs that go back into the 19th century. And those are wonderful as well. Let's see, Jim Brooks.
It may be that now we have kind of the opposite problem. There are plenty of people who've written messages and sent text messages and emails and stuff who would love to be able to destroy them and can't.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I mean, one of the questions, I know a lot of people here are writing memoirs or thinking about writing memoirs, but I know there's a lot of other sources besides family letters and pictures, which is what I used, that other people have used, and might be interesting to hear what other people have used when they're writing. Jim, I don't know what you've written quite a bit. Is it mostly from memory, or? Maybe you didn't hear me. Just asking Jim Rose. Yeah. What are you using for all your memoirs? Mostly memory?
Oh, in large part, yes. I'm saddled with a disastrously detailed memory of all kinds of stupid things, but also my mother never threw out a piece of paper after about 1960, I don't think. And consequently, I had boxes and bales of stuff when I cleaned out her apartment, some of which I had never seen before. And I've used a lot of that, pictures and documents and letters and stories and stuff, some of which I had were kind of embarrassing. I mean, all my letters from college and all of the army and stuff like that, in which I said sometimes the most outrageous things. and I'd love to divorce myself from them now, but it also happened to be true.
Yeah, well, I have to say the same thing. It took me, I have two memoirs and I'm writing this, working on the second one now, which is my memoir, my letters from 1957 until about 1989. And I'm not quite sure I want to publish that for the same reason. It's one thing to look at my mother and be critical of her. It's another thing to look at me and say, oh my God, do I want these stories out in the wide
Right.
world? Because,
Right.
particularly you as an adolescent. And one of the things I've discovered and am discovering still is that my memory, which is so firm about what happened, often is not what happened.
Yeah.
So having these letters has been a real, you know, has
Betsy,
caught me up.
there's a few other comments in the chat box. One of them is, what do you think sparked the letters from Einstein to your grandfather?
Oh,
Howard?
yeah, Jay, I will send you one thing. I think I've said it to you in the past, but I'll send it to you again. We call that grandfather Papi. And Papi lost his oldest daughter, Bonnie, to, she died of pneumonia right in 1936, right after her youngest child was born. And it was right before penicillin came on the market. So Papi basically, well, both Nana and Papi struggled with that loss. I think losing a child is probably one of the hardest things in life. And certainly it was for them. Papi was a very he was a lawyer, and he had to struggle with her death intellectually. And he spent all this time writing these letters, actually doing the study of post-Darwinian thought, trying to prove himself that there was such a thing as a heaven and he would see Bonnie after he died. Nana, by the way, had no problem with that at all. She saw Bonnie ascending to heaven and she never lost her faith that she would see Bonnie again. But Papi was a rational man and a lawyer, and he had to prove it intellectually. So he wrote these two almost unreadable tracts. I've read them, I don't know how many times. It takes a long time to make sense out of them. At the end of the second one, he has proved to himself that there is such a thing as an afterlife and he will see Bonnie. But when he finished all this, he sent these off to all kinds of famous people, including Albert Einstein, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Reinhold Niebuhr, all kinds of interesting people. And darned if they didn't write back. So these letters from Einstein are just responding to my grandfather's search for meaning, religious meaning, not just concrete meaning. And Einstein.
Hey, Betsy, there's some more good comments. I want to make sure you don't miss those.
Okay.
Anne asks, I find the fact that your mother and her cousins went to reside in Germany in the 30s for economic reasons quite fascinating. Was there a compelling reason for them going there? As they were educated women, what was the advantage?
Well, the major compelling reason was that Germany was cheap. And back then, men of my grandfather's social class, he was by that time, maybe not quite, but he was publisher of the Farm Journal, which at one point was a very popular farm magazine back in the 40s and 50s. And you didn't require your women to work if you were of that social class. So, Uncle Tom and Grampy couldn't tell their wives, you got to go out and earn some money because we're not quite breaking even here. So instead, he packed up all the women and sent them to a very cheap place to live. And it worked. And he managed to get his, I think he and Uncle Tommy also sort of backstored it together. I think they sold a house and, got an apartment somewhere and they saved money for 9 months. And then they brought all the women home. So that was how they handled the Depression. Let's see, what else? Sorry. Jim and Prue, did your mother ever remarry? No, Aunt Betty never remarried. And we spent quite a bit of time thinking about that. She's a very attractive woman, great tennis player, very good looking, but didn't. I don't know why, but probably Prue and Jim could talk about that.
I will say that after Johnny, nobody measured up for her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I've been in that place too.
Right.
So,
A lot of people
as you
have.
well know, nobody measured up, and living by yourself is not the worst thing on this earth. I certainly can attest to that one. Oh, I see. There you are, Prue. What else do we have, Amy? Two new ones that I can't see.
Somebody asks, was it hard to start your memoir? Was actually getting started hard?
Well, it took me 6 years in the Learning and Retirement seminar. They're called Writing to Remember. I think I started it in 2013 and am just, last December publishing the first part of it. What worked for me, the reason the letters sat for 25 years is I didn't have any structure to do it. I mean, you can't just sit in your living room by yourself and read letters, that it just, you would never get it done. So what this course did for me was that 2 times every semester, so that's 4 times a year, you had to read, and you had to have a substantial part of your memoir done, and you had half the class to read and get feedback on it. And Jim is in that class now, I think. There are probably other people that I can't see. Oh, yeah, Ina is in it too. What works for me is a structure. And, in other words, I wasn't sitting down to start my memoir. I was sitting down to start something that I had to read to a class next Thursday. And that kind of structure works for me. And I just plunked away and got it done bit by bit. I would take out a group of letters, read them and write them. But as long as I had a deadline and I was responsible to other people, I would get it done. So that was enormously useful, which is why I invited a lot of my Reading to Remember friends to this, because they're all in the same boat. And I have that now with Paige Coulter and another group of, I'm sure some of those people are on this call as well. They helped me with the revision, and they're helping me with the revision of the second part that I'm working on right now, because we have to show up every Thursday and read. And you only read 2 pages, and you can, no matter what's going on in your life, it's possible for me to get 2 pages done.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
Betsy, I'd like to add something.
Uh-huh.
Sandy here in Holyoke, Mass.
Hi.
I had no intention of writing a memoir. There are a lot of saved letters in attics, just as you say. But through a senior center, a fun with writing class, people were writing about childhood memories. And it's the same thing. It was very easy because Monday at 1:30, you need to have something, a paragraph or something written to write.
Mm-hmm.
I began writing about childhood memories and began offering them to the paper of the hometown where I grew up. And I became a columnist. And for 5 years, I did a monthly column with these little 500-word pieces. There was no structure to it, no plan at all. But I now have thick notebooks, these pieces. If I wanted to put them in chronological order or theme order, I think there's a memoir there that could be written, but I offer that as a suggestion, as a awfully easy way. I mean, like, how do you get started? Well, I wasn't writing a book. I'm just writing 500 words.
No rush whatsoever.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
you just put those, you've got them in your computer. You have a printout of them. They don't have to have been published. It was sort of a fluke that mine got to be, but and I realized I have in essence written what if I want to think about it and put it together. And I'm interested that you had it done with collective copies, because that's high on my list of who I might work with if I do that.
Yeah, well, it was inexpensive. And as I say, this is a family memoir, and my assumption was, and I didn't want to end up with 100 copies in my basement. It just felt to me like it's a book that friends and family would be interested in, a couple of libraries, and to do something like this. And the major pleasure for me, since I got a structure to do it, was that I really enjoy it. I would not enjoy sitting down to write a book, but doing this and having friends who listen to it and comment on it and laugh and cry and all that with you has been wonderful. It's been a huge piece of my retirement, and I feel very lucky to have had it.
Congratulations on it. Thank you for sharing.
What else do we have here? Did you write a linear story? That's interesting. I did, Marcia, because Marcia's in my current writing group and we're kind of skipping around on her memoir. I guess I have a linear mind. I did just, and now that I'm revising it, I have an option to do some non-linear stuff, but by and large, it just, it seems to proceed in a linear fashion. That's how I feel.
I was just going to say that I, on the other hand, am writing an episodic memoir.
Mm-hmm.
I'm writing my stories. My kids say, Mom, oh, I've heard that story before, Mom. But I am writing, and then I don't have to be linear at all about it. It's just the things that I remember, and maybe I will tie them all together in a linear way after.
Mm-hmm.
But I like, for me personally, it's good not to have to approach it first and then this and then that. And Sandy, it sounded similar to your approach of just memories from your childhood or from whatever, and mine bridge from childhood to current. But
right, and mine is just memories, and I love that freedom.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to do it now. I haven't been doing the column for the newspaper now for at least 5 years. I started a blog to accompany this so that I could post more pictures or things related to some of the stories. I carry the blog on, and what I tend to do, it's seasonal. So in March, I write something about, oh, there's another story about maple syrup, my mother making maple syrup. There are things that trigger my memories, and the blog has a nice search function, so I can go and see, have I already written about this? So I wrote a little something this week, this month, and say, for more about my mother's syrup making, see what I wrote in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
And I can put the link there. So in a way, I think I don't need to do a book because it's already out there in the public. I grew up in Danvers. I call the blog Remembering Danvers. If I do a book, it'll be called Remembering Danvers, because I'm not telling a true history necessarily. It's what I remember. This is, Betsy, to your point of, I don't know if what I'm remembering is right, but it's I'm remembering these stories. So I've thought about whether there's some way to harvest what's on the blog from all those years and put it into a book form, and is that worth it? So far, I'm busy with plenty of other things in life, and I haven't turned my attention to it. But last July, in the COVID shutdown, on my birthday, I did sit with the two not bound notebooks in which I have the printed copies of all of this, and consider whether there was a book material there. And I got very excited. I wrote an outline. I picked like 15 stories that belong in the first book. I thought there could be a series. I was just so ecstatic that I had planned a book. That's all I've done. Nothing more has happened. No more energy on it since last July. So this summer for my birthday, I might ask myself again whether, do I care that book never happened? I'm not sure I do. But.
Well, I decided that I did want to put these stories between covers because largely for the family, because they've been on a 3-leaf notebook for years, and they weren't tied together very well because they were all written at different times. But I thought if anybody you know, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, whatever, they may take a book off the shelf and read it. But I don't think, you know, if it was just a 3-leaf notebook, it's going to get pitched in the dump. Because I've got too many of those. So.
Well, there's another aspect of putting it up in a blog form, in a searchable form, is that my father in his business life, there were some things that he invented. There were some products that got out there in the world. Some people buy them and then get curious. They search on the internet. They find my story about my dad, you know, that this has the name in there. And they begin to ask me more about my father's work. And I don't have the answers. I don't know much of the technical part of it. But some of these people who bought and used a machine that he made have now educated me so much more about what he did.
Yeah.
And when I get future questions, I now have two people that I can refer all those questions about. You know, it takes it off my shoulder. So I'm that's kind of a random thing that happens, but it's like you discovering more relatives. I'm discovering people who know other aspects of things about my family.
Well, there are a lot of people here who help me with things. David Parsons is here somewhere. He's somewhere on the screen. Anyway, he's the genealogist in our family. And I didn't talk about the last chapter, which is the memorabilia box, but I did put some genealogical charts in there and traced us back. I found this very interesting article in the memorabilia box about an ancestor of ours who actually was regicide. And I looked it up on Wikipedia. It turns out this guy signed, was one of 50-some people who signed the death warrant for King Charles I back in the English Civil War. And the only reason, by the way, that I'm alive in the form I'm in right now is because we got to when he was a Roundhead, and they held forth for 20 years, but then the monarchy was restored and Charles II came back and off with everybody's head who had signed that. But my very canny Scots ancestor basically said that, well, Oliver Cromwell held my hand and forced me to sign it. So instead of having his head taken off, he was shipped off to Jamaica. So it's interesting stories like that. But David Parsons is the one who helped me untangle all the genealogical charts, because I've never gotten, that's another, you know, whole huge field of study that you can get into that I haven't done. So a lot of people here helped me with various things, and I think probably will in the future too. And I didn't get all of them right. I don't know whether maybe some of you are going to listen to the Hemingway series that's going to be on NPR next week. I listened to one where he was talking about doing this with a couple of other people. And he talked about, well, I think I have that down here, that, you know, the issue is, he talked about wrestling the complexities to truth. In other words, you come into a biography or a memoir of somebody, and particularly, you know, I'm making my guesses about my mom feeling like she was in a cage, and I have, you know, a lot of evidence about that, but she's not here for me to talk to her about. And the same thing about the racism. I'm taking my frame and putting it there, and I felt a need to be fairly gentle and non-judgmental about that, to say it, you know, this is what I found, but not to be judgmental, because how do you go back several generations like that and use the frame of reference that you're using now to judge what people were like? And those are, I think, some of the issues that you get if you're writing memoir about a family member, particularly if you have any evidence and even your own memories, you're going to have things that aren't pleasant. And that, but you know, if you're going to be true to your subject matter, you want to write about them. You need to put those in, as well as the things that you remember that are wonderful. So,
Hey, Betsy, let's take one last question, and thanks for everything tonight. But how about the last question is, what are your sister's reactions to the memoir?
okay, I think Debbie is not on my list today. Are you here, Debbie? Either Debbie or Mary.
Here. Kudos.
Oh, there you are, Debbie. There's my sister, Debbie Liddy. Tell me what your reaction is.
One of the primary beneficiaries of this memoir. I thought it was simply marvelous, as Aunt Betty would say.
Yes.
I was flabbergasted by some of the things that's unearthed about Mom and Dad, particularly in the love letters.
Yeah.
I don't know
didn't read
how
any
far
of
to go
those.
with this, but I had an image of my father as being mostly what Betsy will call lawyerly. And it was wonderful to see how good-natured and loving and jealous of Mom and all her
Yep, he had good reason.
swings. Right, and it just gave such a beautiful viewpoint that I might not have felt when I was growing up, but I hope you continue doing this. It's wonderful.
Well, I also told it, this is a classic story, and maybe I'll end with this, but I did tell the truth. Sometime, this must have been in 1948, our parents would go off once a year for a week to a country club in Virginia for a week's vacation, and they'd leave us with Mrs. Altmeyer, who was a very uptight nurse with white hair, you know, absolutely, that she had, remember that kind of bluing that you put on white hair back when? And that was a trial for both of us. It was really awful. And I was not very good one day. I went up to Mrs. Altmeyer's bureau, and she had all these cosmetics, rouge and lipstick and all this kind of stuff. And I ran her comb through a lipstick. And she came home and she had just had her hair done, and she did this to the hair and got lipstick all in her hair and was absolutely furious. And I think it was the next day that my mom came home, and what Mrs. Altmeyer was really upset about is Debbie would not confess at all. She will not admit that she did it. And I was silent as a mouse because Debbie didn't do it. I did it. And I blamed it on her. And the even funnier part of this is that I didn't say anything about it, I don't think, until maybe the 1980s or something. And I told this story to Debbie, and she didn't remember it at all. And I told it to my mother, and she didn't remember it at all. But of course, I kept the guilt in my heart all these years and finally had to fess up. Maybe, Amy, that's probably
That's such a wonderful way to end the story, Betsy. Oh, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Betsy, what a lovely time. And the book is here at the library if anyone would like to check it out. And as Betsy said, at other libraries in the area. Thank you all.
And thanks so much to all my family and friends for coming. It's been an absolute treat to see you all.